One of my goals is just to stay a good human being. I don't know, just get married, have some kids, you know, do something different.
Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown. To all intents and purposes, this should have been a match made in heaven. Both young, attractive, successful recording artists, seemingly with the world at their feet. How and why did it all go wrong? This perfect love story went sour and the world was aghast. Petty jealousies, long-held resentments, the mismatch between fantasy and reality all played their part. For Bobby, career envy reared its ugly head and played out in totally unacceptable behaviors. For Whitney, substance abuse to deal with the pressure she was under as a wife, mother, and singing star led to the unthinkable. But arguably the real loser in this story was their child, Bobby Christina. This is the story of Bobby and Whitney. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born on August 9, 1963. She grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and thanks to her father, John R. Houston, being head of central planning in the mayor's office, the family enjoyed life in a large house in a middle-class neighborhood, with Whitney attending a private Catholic school.
Whitney Houston, from a musical point of view, had the upbringing we can only dream about, surrounded by some of the greatest talents of our time. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a great vocalist with the group The Sweet Inspirations, who had a hit called Sweet Inspiration, who backed Elvis Presley. And as a backing singer, she backed Aretha Franklin, most famously on a song called Ain't No Way. If you just take time out to listen to that and hear those high notes, you will know where Whitney came from. That, when it was a new record, just floored me.
Born Robert Beresford Brown on February 5, 1969, Bobby Brown grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, the seventh of 8 children. With his father, Herbert Brown, a construction worker, and his mother, Carol, a school teacher, Bobby's start in life was more modest. Like Whitney, who sang at her local church many times a week, Bobby joined a church choir, where his talent was recognized and he developed his singing abilities. Seeing the potential in her daughter, Cissy put her all into making sure she would succeed, teaching her how to sing from the mind, the body, and most importantly, the heart.
The first song that Whitney ever performed was Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, and she performed that at the age of 11 when she was a pupil at a Catholic girls' school. And the last song she ever sang was Jesus Loves Me. So her life was framed either side by 2 songs, both of them devotional.
Bobby was left more to his own devices, and at the age of 12, formed a singing group with his friends, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, Ralph Tresvant, and Ronnie DeVoe. Calling themselves New Edition, they rehearsed with a focus and discipline very rare for a group of preteen boys. After winning several talent shows, New Edition was discovered by producer and talent scout Maurice Starr, who landed them a recording contract with a small label called Streetwise. The early days of her working life saw Whitney modeling to earn a living, and she was the first African American to grace the cover of 17 magazine. However, Whitney had bigger plans, seeing herself not as a fashion clothes horse, but as a singer. Bobby was heading towards stardom too. 1983 saw New Edition release their first studio album, Candy Girl, a pop collection of songs that made the group an overnight sensation with teenage girls. The title track, Candy Girl, was highly reminiscent of the Jackson 5's ABC, and reached #1 in the UK chart. Whitney's big break came in 1983 as well, when the legendary producer and executive of Arista Records, Clive Davis, saw Whitney perform at a New York nightclub. Immediately recognizing her immense talent, he signed her on the spot. Later that same year, the young singer made her national television debut on the very popular Merv Griffin show. New Edition were going from strength to strength with their self-titled second album, despite the departure of their manager-producer Maurice Starr after the group accused him of stealing their earnings from their platinum debut. Thanks to more targeted promotion and music tailored for more of a mainstream audience, New Edition won new fans upon the release of this album. The first two singles, Cool It Now and Mr. Telephone Man, both became top 20 pop hits and reached #1 on the R&B singles chart. Although she had been signed by a major record label, Houston did not begin work on an album immediately, as Arista Records executive Clive Davis knew he had someone very special on his books and wanted to ensure he had the right material and top producers for her debut album, eventually bringing to the studio talent such as Jermaine Jackson, narrator Michael Walden, Teddy Pendergrass, and Kashif. Those who had muttered about her singing being linked to her mother's connections in the industry were silenced by the quality of the record and its phenomenal success.
I would like to think that what I have, what's been God-given to me, would have gotten me into it, anyway. It's one thing for having your mom and your cousin being so successful in the business, but it's something that you have to do on your own, You have to establish your own abilities. I mean, it's great to have them as my family and, it got me a lot of places, but I'd like to think I could do it on my own.
Whitney Houston was a pop producer's dream. Now we're used to manufactured girls, boys coming out who look perfect, and we kind of know that they won't be able to sing very well. Whitney Houston had the face, the body, the charm, that wayward, she was so charismatic, she filled the room.
But the first song that drew my attention to Whitney was Saving All My Love for You. Her voice was just more pop, but it didn't lose the soul. She still had soul in it, but it was a pop voice. And so she had this kind of ethereal, pure sound with her voice, and it was very, very different. It was very refreshing.
Things were not going so well for Bobby Brown in New Edition. In fact, in 1986, he left New Edition to pursue a solo career, remarking that, "The most I saw for all the tours and all the records were sold was $500 and a VCR. He felt that being young and naive, the group had been treated like little slaves by people who were only interested in money and power and not the welfare of New Edition. In December of that same year, Brown released his first solo album, King of Stage. While the album sold modestly and scored one major hit, the ballad Girlfriend, it failed to generate the level of excitement and acclaim which Brown had hoped for after the success of New Edition and the group's adoring fans. With the new medium of MTV, which arrived in 1981, becoming essential in terms of promoting singles, artists were keen to be featured on the playlist.
Early on, MTV was, for the most part, playing specifically white rock bands. Michael Jackson famously was unable to get on MTV for a very long time.
How Will I Know, which was Whitney's third US single, went to #1 and was really the first time that a young African-American woman was all over MTV. That video was massively successful. It was on constantly, and it really cemented Whitney's presence in mainstream America.
Bobby Brown also saw his waning stardom now on the ascendancy. Seeking to reinvent himself as an adult artist, Brown spent the next 2 years working closely with the acclaimed R&B songwriters and producers Teddy Riley, L.A. Reid, and Babyface. The result of their collaboration, released in the summer of 1988, was a radically new R&B album called Don't Be Cruel that took the music world by storm, selling 7 million copies and becoming the best-selling album of the year. Brown's high-powered, sexually charged music and live performances earned him comparisons to his childhood idol, Michael Jackson. This album spawned 5 top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, including the #1 single that was penned by Brown, My Prerogative. At this point, Whitney was a dazzling award winner too, with American Music Awards, Grammys, and an MTV Video Music Award in her trophy cabinet. Following her breakthrough, doors were opened for other African-American women, such as Janet Jackson and Anita Baker, to find deserved success for their music. The challenge for Whitney now was to follow up her first album, and she did this with style in 1987 with her second, simply titled Whitney, which debuted at #1 on the Billboard chart, the first album by a female artist to do so.
But with I Wanna Dance With Somebody, this was a new Whitney Houston. This was a pop singer.
I remember the video well. It was on MTV all the time. No small feat. She was the first black female to be on MTV pretty much constantly.
It really was a defining moment in the 1980s, full of optimism, neon colors, and a lot of positivity. Whitney Houston in that song did more than just do a great performance. She kind of summed up a decade.
With the first 4 singles from the album all peaking at #1, a continuation of her previous 3 #1 singles, Whitney became the only artist ever to have 7 consecutive chart toppers, surpassing records previously set by the legendary Beatles and the Bee Gees. She was America's sweetheart who sang like an angel and campaigned against apartheid. Seemingly, Bobby Brown had it all too at last. The chart-topping records, the fame and adulation, yet success led to temptation and, just as Brown reached the height of his popularity in the late 1980s, his personal life began to spiral out of control. Towards the latter stages of his tour, he invited criticism from his suggestive and crude acts, and tabloid newspapers and magazines were quick to report on Brown's hard partying lifestyle. Perhaps it's Whitney's rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at the 1991 Super Bowl final that cemented her place in American hearts.
Every single other person that's come and sung it, I don't remember, except her one. She completely nailed it.
This was and is now still one of the greatest moments in NFL history. At the time America was in the Gulf War, a lot of people had sons and daughters overseas. It was a time of great patriotism, and at the same time, you know, anytime you're at war, there's this deep insecurity and fear.
And she rocked up with a little bow in her hair, a tracksuit or a jumpsuit. Never before had a national anthem been released and zoomed into the top 5. It was a huge achievement, and no wonder. And again, Americans just kept loving her more. That was their song. This was their girl.
To this day, I cry every time I hear it. The most beautiful rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner that has ever been done before or since. It was a defining moment in Whitney's career. She was America's beloved daughter for doing such an extraordinary job on such a significant song at such an important time.
I knew Bobby, and we used to hang out in London. This is just before he met Whitney. You know, Bobby was sort of coming down from Prerogative and New Edition, and all of that was kind of going down a bit at that time, but he was still very, very popular. And we used to hang out in London, and he was great. And Bobby was the right character. He's a nutter. Contrary to all the stories you hear about people, he's a really nice guy. We had fun, and he was very grounded. And we took him around Brixton and stuff. We wanted to hang with the homies, and we had fun, you know? And then I remember when he came back to London again, he had just met Whitney, and he was going on and on about how amazing she is. And, you know, he's really in love with her, and he was he really fell for her hard.
Whitney was America's princess, America's sweetheart. She hadn't put a foot wrong, and she was seen as very clean living. She'd been linked with Eddie Murphy, Randall Cunningham, a famous football player, and these were pretty good guys. But when she got together with Bobby Brown, the headlines were kind of like, what? What are these people doing together? He was a bit of a ladies' man, a real bad boy who already had kids, lots of exes. And I think people worried. Although on paper it doesn't work, Bobby Brown and Whitney got on so well because he treated her like a normal girl. And she said that many guys were just so scared of her and wanted to be overly nice that she was massively attracted to this guy who was gentlemanly but had nothing to prove. And she says that all he knew she needed was love. There was chemistry, full stop. Of course it shouldn't have worked, but how many girls know they shouldn't have gone out with a bad guy, but can't help that feeling, that gut feeling that you're just for some reason attracted to him, that you want to be with him. She was magnetized to him.
He was a total laugh though, he was funny, you know, he was really funny. I mean, I brought him back to my house to meet my mum and stuff like that, and my mum cooked him Jamaican food and the Bodyguards, and we had a right laugh. He was lovely. There was no two ways about it. They were good people, and I thought it was great that he was starting to date her. I thought it was fine that you didn't think it was a strange thing at all, outside of the media I'm talking. Okay, to everyone else it was like, God, what's that about? Why are they together? But, you know, he's funny. So I can imagine that Whitney, who's always been around the gowns and all of that life and stuff like that, he must have been a right laugh for her. Do you know, she was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have fun now, this is great.
There was some amazing footage that my co-director Rudy Dalzell shot of her backstage, you know, playing around with Bobby Brown or so on. They're really just like, you know, teenagers together, and they're acting bits from different movies, you know, Ike and Tina Turner, or scenes from Natural Born Killers, and they're so funny together. You just see that this is a wonderful, fun-loving person who kind of, I think, got pushed into this position that she didn't really want. I think she loved singing, but she never wanted the fame. She never wanted the incredible disapproval that came when she was with people that the press or the public disapproved of. There was an invasion of her privacy, I think, an invasion of this fun-loving person who found it increasingly hard probably to be who she was.
One of the avenues that Whitney Houston had began to tentatively explore in the early 1990s was film acting, when she was approached to be the lead in a movie called The Bodyguard.
The Bodyguard cemented Whitney's role really as an iconic legend. You know, she'd already kind of been hailed as this extraordinary voice and beauty, but with The Bodyguard, she was a movie star. She was great in the movie. She's not a natural actress, but she did everything well enough. She was intelligent enough to read the lines in a believable way. She had great chemistry with Kevin, who really fought for Whitney in the role. He said, in fact, he said at her funeral, a lot of guys could have played my part, but only one person could have been Rachel Marin.
The soundtrack itself was just Whitney Houston's biggest hit of her entire career, which was saying something because her first album sold 13 million copies.
Now, I Will Always Love You is such an interesting song because it was written by Dolly Parton not as a love song as we know romantic or sexual love. It was a farewell to her singing and business partner, Porter Wagoner, with whom she made her first hits.
Funnily enough, it nearly wasn't to be. They had another song in mind which had been released a few months earlier, so decided to go with I Will Always Love You because it hadn't been released for years. It was #1 for 20 consecutive weeks in America. Dolly Parton says, "Thank you, Whitney, for making this a far more beautiful song than I could ever have hoped to."
The film's success led to Whitney becoming even more adored by the public. This, however, was not conducive to a happy marriage. Although Bobby was still making relatively successful records and winning awards, but could not come close to the kind of fame and adulation his wife was experiencing, alcohol and drugs were Bobby's crutch. But the abuse of these substances led to multiple arrests involving violence and an incident never reported to police when Brown was kidnapped by a New York gang over a drug debt and Whitney Houston paid a reported $400,000 ransom. With ego knocked by being called Mr. Houston, Bobby was obviously jealous but could not admit to this gnawing emotion.
You know, in Whitney's very gut-wrenching interview with Oprah Winfrey, she talks about the fact that there's something that happens to a man when a woman has so much more fame than he does. You know, she said that she used to tell people, "Don't call me Whitney Houston, I'm Mrs. Brown," to try and make him feel more comfortable.
I guess you could really view it as a modern-day cautionary tale. I mean, even before the reality show, there was all sorts of rumors of domestic violence, drug abuse. Whitney Houston started showing up late for performances. She would cancel interviews, cancel concerts, show up hours late. It was just, for our times, possibly the most tumultuous marriage that stayed together in pop culture.
And the more it became impossible for her to be herself, I think she retreated more and more into her own little private thing, which was drugs.
She had all sorts of problems with addiction, and so did he. And they both had, very troubled upbringings, and they both, to a greater or lesser degree, had issues around self-esteem. Neither of them were really strong or indeed very powerful or indeed very congruent people who were easy with themselves. And they created what is no doubt a kind of codependency.
And then when she became more and more criticized and judged for doing that, I think it just made things so much worse.
Now, the thing about codependency is it locks two people together into this world where each one of them thinks the other person is the only person that truly understands them, the only person that truly loves them, the only person that truly sees them for who they are. But in reality, it just sustains a life full of denial and full of refusing to accept the truth about who and what they are. So whereas it seems to relieve the pain for a short while, it actually deepens it, because it's actually living a lie. And that's one of the things that their relationship was about. So to the point where Whitney actually said, he was my drug. And that about sums it up. And she says, even when we're fighting, she said, it's love. When we fight, it's love.
Gary, her brother, who was an NBA star but then lost his place in the team because of drug taking, who went into a spiral of depression and started taking more and more and more drugs, and who is still addicted. And I asked him, what is it? Why do you keep going back to it? And he said that it was about things that happened in his childhood that just played over and over again in his mind, and he sought some sort of escape from that. I suspect that's what it was with Whitney as well. I think she was running away from something. You don't have three siblings who are all such self-destructive addicts without there being something behind it.
There was definitely a power struggle there. Because if you remember in the early days, Bobby was huge. It must have been incredibly hard for him no longer to be as big as he was, but he's with the biggest star in the world. I'm sure that impacted the relationship. That couldn't have been easy. That's tough.
The song I Have Nothing is a typical example of the power of Whitney Houston's voice. When she sang, it was undeniable. Like, you couldn't look away. It was compelling. What's interesting about that song is the words are, I have nothing without you. And I think it really was how Whitney felt about Bobby Brown at that time. I mean, Whitney had the world at her feet, but yet she constantly submitted herself to him. They became kind of codependently linked in a very destructive way, but I don't think anything, the fame, the talent, the money, meant anything to her, nearly close as much as it did, to be loved by him.
Despite their problems, the couple brought a new life into the world when their daughter, Bobby Christina, was born on March 13th, 1993.
Having a baby, I'm looking forward to that. Raising a child, hearing mommy, that's what's foremost in my head right now. I can't, the movie's done, the soundtrack's done. Thinking about doing a gospel album, So, I'm just kind of like, going with the flow.
Whitney has achieved her dream of marriage and motherhood and was determined that her precious daughter would accompany her everywhere. Being on tour or on film sets was no life for a child, and Bobby Christina spent most of the time with Whitney's mother or the crew. It certainly could not be considered a normal childhood, and the little girl witnessed things she should never have seen, which perhaps impacted upon her mental health as she grew up more than anyone realized. Brown's bad behavior was escalating. It almost seemed that if his musical career was on the wane, he was intent on being in the limelight for reasons other than music. becoming involved in a number of incidents that included a club brawl, an assault and battery charge that led to probation, a drunk driving accident, and a stint at the Betty Ford Clinic. Salvation beckoned when Brown was asked to record with the fully reunited New Edition, whose comeback album, Home Again, entered the charts at #1 in September 1996. Brown toured with the group, but believing in his ability to be a solo star, he left the group. On a high from the success with New Edition, Brown released his 4th solo album, Forever, in 1997. Due to lack of promotion and Brown's desire to break from previous partners and write and produce most of the tracks himself, the album did not sell well at all, and the album's only single, Feeling Inside, was not a hit. Around this time, Whitney was also promoting her first studio album in 7 years.
This came after a lot of kind of train wreck personal life stuff with drug issues, fights in the marriage with her and Bobby, all kinds of trouble. She came out of that recording this album. Originally, it was going to be a greatest hits album with a couple of new songs, but actually once they got in the studio, she had great collaborators on this, including Missy Elliott, some great songs. It turned into an album all by itself.
My Love Is Your Love, without really compromising her sound too much. You know, it wasn't her just trying to get on on a hardcore hip hop track, a Timbaland beat or anything like that. It really just kind of showed that she was able to translate her voice into something that had a little more edge to it, but without really alienating any of her prior fan base.
The song My Love Is Your Love was amazing on so many fronts because an awful lot of critics had, dismissed Whitney as a thing of the past. And I guess her fans were turning their back looking at new music. And when this song came out, it was awesome because it had a slight reggae feel. It was a million miles from the pop you might associate her with. Wyclef Jean, Lauryn Hill from the Fugees were the sound of the moment. They were working with her on this song. So all of a sudden, she didn't just please her old fans, but a young generation sat up and thought, this is a cool sound.
Having been perceived by the record-buying public as a good girl with a perfect image in the 1980s and early 1990s, Whitney's behavior had changed dramatically by the end of the decade. Even though Whitney had had critical and commercial success with her latest album, the foundations underpinning her success had begun to crumble. Rumors had started to circulate about Whitney's sexual orientation back in the 1980s after moving in with her school friend, Robin Crawford.
Widely known in show business that Whitney and Robin were together. And this was not some kind of scandalous pickup. They'd known each other from high school.
They were best friends, all the way through adolescence, and there were all kinds of rumors about a relationship between Whitney and Robin. In fact, Robin was actually working for Whitney for a time. She was like an assistant, and they were together. Bobby alluded to this himself when he looked back on the marriage, kind of implying that one of the reasons Whitney married him was to combat these lesbian rumors, because it wouldn't do at that time for America's sweetheart to be gay.
Most of the rumors in Whitney Houston's case have been confirmed by very close sources such as her bodyguard, family members,
I mean, as hard as it was for Whitney Houston to be a black woman, you know, taking American mainstream by storm, imagine if she was a black lesbian woman. It certainly, at that time particularly, would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to win over, you know, the very reactionary middle America.
So if you were saying, like Whitney did, that I am a good girl, I'm an honest girl, I'm an all-American girl, I am who I say I am, I'm a heterosexual girl. When you're saying all those things to the world and the truth might be slightly different, that creates all kinds of problems, particularly when you have a religious upbringing like she did, because what it means is she's not just being dishonest to other people and dishonest to herself, she's also being dishonest to God.
And you know, there have been theories about Whitney's drug use, including, you know, some gay activists who have said that if Whitney had been allowed to live as a lesbian woman, she wouldn't have had all these drug demons.
This was probably the most positive relationship in her life. Robin was like the guardian angel. Whether she was gay or not is the secondary question. Yes, I think they had a romantic life together, but, you know, there was a kind of witch hunt, which is like, you know, who has the right to harass somebody in that way? And she had to put up with all that stuff.
I think it only makes what happened in her death and her addiction and her marriage that much more sad.
Unfortunately, the power struggle between Robin and Bobby intensified, resulting in an ultimatum. Knowing that Bobby was a seriously bad influence on Whitney and that their behavior and practices would destroy her, Robin gave her friend a choice. It's gonna be me or Bobby. When Whitney replied, "Tell her I accept her resignation," they did not speak for years, and her ally was gone from her life when arguably she needed her most.
You know, Bobby Brown said if Robin had been around at the end of her life, she'd probably still be with us. You know, the American public felt they owned her. And how dare she have a relationship with a woman? How dare she have a relationship with Bobby Brown? It was like she didn't have control of her life anymore. And it, you know, I think that was obviously outrageous.
Without Robin's stabilizing voice of reason and following a self-destructive path of drug codependency with her husband, Whitney had become increasingly unreliable, canceling 5 shows during her 1999 tour, including a sold-out arena event in her hometown of Newark, just 15 minutes before showtime. Jeopardizing her career, she arrived late for photo shoots and was reportedly fired from a planned Oscar ceremony appearance due to a poor rehearsal performance. The speculation was that her drug use was causing her voice to suffer.
What was astonishing and heartbreaking was to listen to her voice, because it had gone. In part, she sounded like she was really struggling to speak. It was sore. And of course, we know now that it was because she smoked crack cocaine. Of all the drugs she could have taken, of all the ways she could have taken them, injecting, taking orally, she decided to do the thing that would take away her voice, her gift.
The voice was the mechanism which put her in front of the world and put this person before the world who wasn't really the person that the world thought they were looking at. And so by destroying the voice, she actually breaks that illusion. That's, you know, well documented with people who find themselves in the public eye as someone or something they can't actually reconcile with who they really are. They want to sabotage that and they want it all to end.
I think she was uncomfortable with having such a huge gift that eclipsed him. And this was her way of messing it all up, taking it all away, so she could kind of say to Bobby, to please his insecurities, look, I'm just like you now.
What you do with the kids? I love the children. People do much for the kids. Whitney loves and believes in children. I do. Hello.
Fans were worried about Whitney's health when she made an appearance on Michael Jackson 30th Anniversary Special, when her extremely thin frame further spurred rumors of drug use. Although her publicist claimed that Whitney has been under stress due to family matters, and when she is under stress, she doesn't eat. Surprisingly, these family matters was hitting at the fact that Whitney's father, John, had been stealing huge sums of money from her. After the breakdown of her association with Robin Crawford, Whitney's father gained full control over managing her career and business affairs.
And I think at a certain point she just wanted to stop, but her family and this entourage who were living off her, you know, apparently she was supporting over 50 people, buying their cars, their houses, sending their kids to school, paying their medical bills, which in America is something. So there was a massive pressure on her.
Shortly after finding out about her father's disloyalty, she gave an arrestingly honest TV interview with Diane Sawyer.
The Diane Sawyer interview was absolutely astonishing. You had Whitney come in, sit down very regally, as you'd expect, trying to keep herself together, and you thought, okay, maybe she's all right here. When Diane Sawyer went for the jugular and asked her the tricky questions, as a good journalist should, did you take crack? She was, you could tell, very angry and trying to suppress that.
It's not just thin.
No, what is it? Diane, tell me. Do you know?
It's scary thin. Whitney dying, crack rehab fails.
First of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay? We don't do crack. We don't do that. Crack is whack.
And she came across as very disjointed, jumpy. If she hadn't taken anything, any drugs then she certainly had quite recently before, as later came to be the truth. But she was very emotional and fragile, and it's hard to watch because now we know just how much of a lie she was living.
Drug abuse in the marriage did not abate, and as a consequence, in December 2003, Bobby Brown was charged with battery following an altercation during which he threatened to beat Houston and then assaulted her, with police reporting that Houston had visible injuries to her face. This did not stop Bravo Network commissioning in early 2004 the reality TV program Being Bobby Brown.
Rather than ask what went wrong with the marriage, when you saw them on TV and the documentary following Bobby Brown, but Whitney is very much involved, the question really was, what's right with that marriage?
The executives at the channel would not even consider the show unless Whitney agreed to appear. Bobby was desperate to get some fame on his own, apart from his wife, so he persuaded her to be on the show. When Whitney agreed to be filmed, the show got the green light. But it was one of the worst decisions she ever made. For the rest of, film history, we can watch these scenes of a deteriorating Whitney talking about bowel movements, talking about being drunk, clearly under the influence of all kinds of drugs.
All right. If I don't have it, I'm not the man.
You're friggin' hallucinating.
I want things. I like things. I am things.
And you're like, I don't want this.
I love cars and
I don't need money. I don't need cars. I have love.
You could see him trying to drag his power back from Whitney. Like when he said one day when she came into the room, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, bring that ass in here quick, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with it. And that's a man who's trying to sit down and say, don't think she's the boss, I am.
It is train wreck television. You would see Bobby Brown just, delusions of grandeur, ego out of control, drinking during the day, and Whitney Houston doing the same.
It broke me in two because I know that something must have just gone wrong there. Because they weren't like that in the early 90s, okay? When you saw the two of them together and they were out, it was fun.
A man like Bobby Brown doesn't want to be Mr. Houston. He wants his wife to be Mrs. Brown. And because that could never happen, the implications for their marriage were severe and damaging.
So sometimes two energies come together and they can destroy each other. It's not about blame. You can't blame anyone. There's sometimes two people are toxic together. Sometimes that can happen. And I think that's what happened there, and it's sad.
She did it for her husband, she did it to help him, and it was very typical of their relationship that everything she did to help him just brought her down.
Can I take a picture with you?
No. No.
Ma'am, I'm eating. You see me eating?
Sorry.
Yeah. I'll take a picture with you. She's jealous.
It's all right.
She's a sister. I don't want to mess with.
See, I don't understand. See, me, I got into the business for people. But not my wife, man. She got into it to sing. So, you want a picture with me? Cool. You want a picture with her? I doubt it.
Eventually, the couple filed for divorce in September 2006.
You filming? Don't do that.
Uh-oh.
Damn! Damn! Damn!
Better get makeup.
I just want a real life. Lord, I just want to be a real person. Praise God.
Houston gave her first interview in 7 years in September 2009, appearing on Oprah Winfrey's season premiere. The interview was billed as the most anticipated music interview of the decade. Houston detailed the issues and breakdown of the marriage and told Winfrey that Brown had been abusive during their marriage and had spat on her on one occasion.
So when we got back to the house, he's gonna hate I said, but he spit on me. He spit on me. He actually spit on me. And my daughter was coming down the stairs and she saw it. And that was pretty intense.
How did you feel?
I was horrified. He spit on me in my face.
After the divorce was finalized, Houston was granted custody of Bobby Christina. Neglected as a child, she was very unhappy. Although Whitney tried very hard to always have her daughter by her side, ironically, that was the worst thing for an impressionable and vulnerable young person.
And let's spare a thought for Bobby Christina. This is a girl who's grown up with parents, both of whom are addicts. This is a child whose role models, parental role models, are models of denial, models of addiction, and models of people who are living lives which are destructive and addictive.
In later years, Whitney is alleged to have partied with Bobby Christina as if they were this buddy to do drugs with.
Determined to be free of her addictions and become the mother figure for her daughter that she had always wanted to be, Whitney entered a 14-week drug rehabilitation program. Unable to complete this rehab due to a surprising lack of funds, Whitney decided that to save herself and her daughter, her only course of action was to record new music and go on tour. With her inner circle advising against this, Whitney felt there was no other option at this point and so released a new album, I Look to You, in August 2009.
I think at that point, her public life, the idea of Whitney Houston as, a drug casualty, as a reality TV casualty, really overshadowed her music career. And I Look to You, it kind of came and went. At that point, Whitney Houston kind of ceased to be a pop singer.
Whitney's infamous 2010 comeback tour, which was around Europe and the UK, drew a lot of fans who were ultimately very disappointed with what they heard. Almost universally, the tour was ravaged by fans and critics alike. Whitney was erratic, her voice was totally not on form, and all kinds of videos leaked on YouTube about her forgetting words, forgetting what she was supposed to say, and seemingly intoxicated. The world really saw it up close when she performed on the UK show The X Factor. Her dress was literally coming down on stage, and she didn't notice.
That tour, it was kind of a disaster. The voice was still there, you could get glimpses of it, but nonetheless, you could just tell that this was a person in poor health, and She had no real career momentum at that point.
Brown kept a pretty low profile in the years after the reality show and his divorce. He contributed to Damian Marley's 2006 song Beautiful. In 2010, he duetted with Macy Gray on Real Love. New Edition members reunited to perform Jackson 5 hits as a tribute to the late Michael Jackson at the 2009 BET Awards. They formally reunited the next year and embarked on a 30th anniversary tour. Although no one knew it, February 9th, 2012, was to be Houston's very last public performance.
For the most part, Whitney stayed away from LA. She spent a lot of time in Atlanta where she lived in a big house. Didn't really do much, didn't really work, just kind of hung around. Coming out to LA for the Grammys was a big deal for her.
The last song that Whitney publicly sang was Jesus Loves Me. It was an impromptu performance for her friend, the singer Kelly Price, who the next day was going to be receiving a Grammy Award. And it was heartbreaking because that was going to be the final song. Then how poignant that she's talking to Jesus, that religion means so much to her, and she wasn't to know that the next day she'd be gone.
Tragically, 2 days later, on February 11th, Houston was found unconscious in Suite 434 at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, submerged in the bathtub.
I literally just got off stage and I got a text message from the BBC, please urgent call. So I rang back. He said, Misha, this is Stan from the BBC. Whitney Houston we've just found out that she's died. And I'm just like, I mean, I let out this scream. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, what are you talking about? No, it's a mistake. It can't be right. But then I thought, well, for him to be calling me at 12 o'clock at night, you know, it must be real.
A report issued by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office stated that the official cause of death was an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine in her system contributing factors. Whitney's untimely death sent shockwaves around the world. An invitation-only memorial service was held for Whitney Houston on Saturday, February 18, 2012, at the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey.
Bobby Brown's behaviour at the funeral was nothing short of odd and disrespectful in many ways. Many would say that they wouldn't have expected him even to be invited.
It is no secret that Whitney's family despises him and to a great degree blame a lot of Whitney's problems with substance abuse on her marriage and her relationship to Bobby. However, Whitney's family went on the record and said no, he is invited to the funeral, and Bobby was invited to bring 2 guests along with him. Now, on the day of the funeral, here comes Bobby Brown with an entourage of 9. Because they'd been asked to move, not Bobby, but some of the people he'd brought, he became irate, he became very angry. Al Sharpton, who was at the funeral, actually tweeted, "I'm trying to calm down Bobby Brown. Today is not about him. Today is about Whitney."
No matter how he was feeling, that day was not about him.
That whole thing was just like a media circus, you know, trying to interpret what it might have meant that Bobby Brown left early. Is it because he cared too much? Is it because he doesn't care enough?
Even in these tragic circumstances, it seemed to the world that Bobby wanted the spotlight, although with his mother and father both dying within the previous 12 months, his emotional state and agitation at yet another funeral might be somewhat forgiven. Tragedy struck again in July 2015 when Bobby Christina was found unconscious in a filled bathtub in her home, chillingly mirroring her mother's death. Bobby was in a medically induced coma for 6 months before dying from pneumonia, aged just 22 years old.
There'll never be another Whitney. There's only one Whitney Houston, you know, and there'll never be another one.
I think she was a real kind of a real survivor. And I think when you see the number of movies and albums and tours that she did over such a short space of time, I just don't know how she must have had no time to herself at all. And I think at a certain point, she just wanted to stop.
For me, it's sad because she didn't get that personal fulfillment, it seems, in her personal life.
Whitney Houston's death really did reverberate around the world. You know, sometimes I think you don't realize what an iconic figure someone is until they're gone.
Well, I think one of the really fascinating but infuriating things about Whitney is that I don't think she ever knew who she was. She was always struggling to find herself.
There's two great lines from Whitney. One, she said, "I am my own worst enemy," and in one of her most famous and moving songs, really, which is "I Have Nothing," she said, I can't hide from myself. I can't run from myself."
The only time I feel that she ever felt comfortable, the only time she ever felt sure of who she was when she was on stage and she was singing. And those moments are, you know, the real her.
We'll just remember the genius that took her to the top of the world, and in posterity, we'll make sure she stays there.
I think the thing with Bobby, the sense I get of him from the footage of him over the years is that he's someone who's always putting on a front, you know. He had this tough guy image, but actually I think he was not ever a tough guy. He was kind of a bit pathetic. He's a kind of closed person in some ways, you know. I don't think he's reached the stage of his life where he's ready to open up and to talk openly about this. Maybe he never will reach that stage. Sometimes people not answering and seeing how they don't answer a question is almost more revealing than actually having them say something. And I think this is one of those cases.